Hi everyone, I'm Dr.Animaction. Welcome to what's, if I'm to be perfectly honest, probably going to end up being the first part of my next year in the animated 90s series. The vote was actually closer than I expected, but it looks like once I finish this series in a few weeks here, I'll be moving on to the animated 70s. Not to worry though, as the animated aughts, or O's, or 2000s, whatever they're called, is definitely on my radar and will be coming sometime down the line. The only other note I have right now is that Tokusatsu in America is out to an early lead in next week's alternate video poll, and that'll be up for a couple more days for anyone else who wants to vote. But no more time for intros today, as I'm trying to catch my schedule up with this video, so I'll simply say like, subscribe, and share if you love all things animated and animation adjacent, and we'll jump right in.
Yeah, it's a bit much.
1995 brought several great new series, with plenty of action, some awesome superheroes, including one that was adult-leaning in the best possible way, some excellent comedies, and entirely too much Jim Carrey. We saw video games expand to include some new and interesting genres from the medium, and a couple of great action shows that leaned heavily toward the female audience. However, perhaps more important than any other event of not only the year, but potentially the decade, was the appearance of more or less true anime on broadcast TV. Dragon Ball and Sailor Moon may not have gotten the love they deserved from the networks that aired them, but they definitely caught some attention and started something magical here. I'd say let's take a look and see if these events from '95 persisted or led to anything new and bigger in the world of animation, but I know enough of you are anime fans to already know the answer to that. So instead, let's just continue our journey through the decade and see how those new trends manifested as we proceed into 1996. First though, let's take a look at what was still in the air from the previous year as we entered into this new one. Well, the 80s hangs on for one more year with the last season of the original TMNT running into 1996. But after this, the decade lives on only in our hearts and reruns. From 1990, we were still watching Captain Planet and the Planeteers and Bobby's World, and from 91, just those three original Nicktoons with Doug, Rugrats, and Ren and Stimpy. However, Doug did so as a Disney cartoon rather than a Nicktoon. To correct an error I made last year, Doug was not in fact on the air in 1995, as Nickelodeon had opted to not renew the series. During that off year though, Disney bought Jumbo Pictures, which is the producer of the series, and relaunched it this year as brand spanking new Doug on ABC. Moving on though, 1992 still had Donald's Quack Attack, Eek the Cat, X-Men the Animated Series, and Toonheads. An impressive 10 series remained from 93, including Biker Mice from Mars, The Itsy Bitsy Spider, Rocko's Modern Life, Beavis and Butthead, The Terrible Thunder Lizards, Animaniacs, Madeline, Tales from the Crypt Keeper, VeggieTales, and Mighty Morphin Power Rangers, which actually re-premiered twice this year. First as Mighty Morphin Alien Rangers for 10 episodes, and later as Power Rangers Zeo. From 1994, there was still an astonishing 22 series on the air, so here's a graphic of which ones, rather than have me read them all. And then we had 1995 come in with 33 series surviving into the new year, which is another record breaker with a 78.6% survival rate, which is truly impressive. Again, I'm not reading those, but here's a picture. With all of that hanging on, it must mean we didn't lose too much, but let's take a look and see. As TMNT was the only 80s show hanging on last year as well, we didn't lose anything else from that decade. From 1990 though, we lost Tiny Toon Adventures, and from 91, Liquid Television and Tasmania, so the losses are already off to kind of a painful start. Bad news though, it gets even worse, as from 1992 we lost not only Mickey's Mouse Tracks, but Batman the Animated Series as well. I'm sure nothing else will be missed like that one, but moving on, Two Stupid Dogs, The Moxie Show, and The Pink Panther dropped out from 1993, and so did more than half a dozen from 94. These included Aladdin the Series, The Baby Huey Show, The Brothers Grunt, Bump in the Night, The Critic, Free Willy, and Wildcats. And finally, the 10 shows that we lost from 1995 consisted of Once Upon a Time, The Americas, Aeon Flux, Darkstalkers, Littlest Pet Shop, The Max, Santo Bugito, which I actually said right this time instead of calling it San Bugito, The Schnookums and Meat Funny Cartoon Show, Space Strikers, The Superman Batman Adventures, and Ultra Force. I've got to say, that's one of the most painful years for losses in quite a while. We can only hope that some of the replacements we get will fill the voids that some of those shows left. Before I dive into this new year of shows, I'm going to give you all some insight into my personal situation for the year, as it absolutely affected how much of and which of the new shows I watched. As 1996 was the year that I graduated high school, you can probably imagine I wasn't watching much animation in the first half of the year. Worse than that, as far as impacting my watch time though, I left for basic training at the end of July this year and didn't really sit in front of a TV again until getting to my permanent unit at the beginning of November. That being said, I hope you can all cut me some slack for any shortcomings I have with my experience with the 41 new series that came out this year. Believe me when I say that there are several I'd never even heard of before starting this channel, and several that I really want to catch up with. So I'm looking forward to going through them with you all and getting an even better idea of what I missed out on. We'll go ahead and start where we always do, by taking a look at the classic properties and characters that got the animation treatment. I'd thought this category monopolized the Part 1 video from last year, but it's got nothing on what's coming along this year. We'll kick things off by taking a look at the properties that came from books though, looking first at one called Little Mouse on the Prairie. This was a comedy slice-of-life series, not an anthropomorphic version of Little House on the Prairie, that was based on the 1973 Serendipity book series by children's author Stephen Cosgrove. The show follows the daily adventures of a city mouse who moves to the country and is actually the second adaptation of the material. The first was a Japanese series from 1983 called Serendipity: The Pink Dragon. This series, though, was co-produced by Saban Entertainment and Chinese studio Afanti International Animation Corp. And ran for a single 26-episode season. Another one this year that was based on a series of children's books was the long-running PBS Kids series Arthur. I mean long-running too, as only The Simpsons and South Park rank ahead of it in that regard. The series is another slice of life that focuses on teaching lessons to a very young audience. Adapted from the 1976 book series by author Mark Brown, it ran for 253 episodes over 25 seasons. One interesting factoid of note about this series is that the theme song was called Believe in Yourself and was written and performed by Ziggy Marley and the Melody Makers. Aging things up a little bit though, my next series is based on a book for a slightly older audience. Specifically, it's based on Charles Dickens' 1838 novel Oliver Twist, about an orphan escaping from the forced workhouse he was stuck in and running off to London to find his family. The story was adapted by Saban Entertainment as a 52-episode series called Saban's Adventures of Oliver Twist, and took the basic premise from Dickens and diverged from there. It was syndicated as a part of the company's programming block called the Saban Kids Network. I had a couple more from books that I was going to cover here, but I moved one to a later category and removed one completely, as it was a series of direct-to-video releases that felt more appropriate for a potential future animated 90s and film series. Moving on though, we have one more series based on a book this year with Adventures from the Book of Virtues. Actually, this one was based on two books, called The Book of Virtues, A Treasury of Great Moral Stories, and The Children's Book of Virtues, written in 1993 and 95 respectively by Ronald Reagan's Secretary of Education, William Bennett. So yeah, it's a series that focuses on morals and ethics, written by a politician. No comment from me on that one at all. Anyway, the stories in both books are actually based on everything from folktales to fables to Bible stories, so I guess the series was actually an adaptation of an adaptation, or several adaptations. It ran for 39 episodes across 3 seasons on PBS, and starred quite a few notable voice actors like Cass Soucy, Jim Cummings, Pamela Adlon, who we probably all best recognize as Bobby from King of the Hill, and Frank Welker. That's it for books this year though, so let's turn our attention to comics, with a new take on Richie Rich called, well, Richie Rich. Again. I assume that most of you watching this video are familiar with Richie Rich, but as a quick recap, the character was created by Alfred Harvey and Warren Kremer and first appeared in a comic called Little Dot from Harvey Comics in 1953. This was the character's second animated series after his anthology appearances in several early 80s configurations, but where that one came from Hanna-Barbera, this series was from Harvey Films and Film Roman. Notably, the voice director for the series was Susan Blue, who'd not only had a long career as a voice actor herself with notable roles like J.B. McBride from Brave Star and Arcee from the Transformers, but went on from here to direct for several significant series and Viz animes. This show only lasted for a single syndicated 13-episode season. Also coming from the world of Harvey Comics was a new version of Casper in The Spooktacular Adventures of Casper. I say Casper was originally a comic character, but even before that, he was the Paramount Pictures theatrical cartoon character, and was based on a concept from an unpublished children's book from the creator of Felix the Cat, Joe Oriolo, and fellow animator Seymour Reed. In fact, the comic didn't really come out until 4 years after the first short was released in 1945. Anyway, prior to this series, the character had appeared in 55 theatrical shorts, 4 other animated series, and a live-action film, for which this show served as an official sequel. It ran on Fox Kids for 52 episodes across 4 seasons. Sticking with comics, the year also brought another animated version of Alex Raymond's 1934 pulp comic strip hero, Flash Gordon. This is probably another one that doesn't need much of a summary for this crowd, but the story's about a human named Flash who, along with his girlfriend Dale and scientist ally Dr. Zarkov, defend the Earth, no pun intended, from the evil Ming the Merciless and his forces. The character has a huge list of appearances in various film and print mediums throughout his history, but is best recognized by most of us, I'd imagine, from the 1980 live-action movie and his two previous animated outings in 1979's New Adventures of Flash Gordon and 86's Defenders of the Earth. This latest series received 26 syndicated episodes. We've got a couple of superheroes to talk about this year as well, as long as we're on comic books, with one from each of the big two. We'll start with Marvel's entry, which was a new series following their Green Goliath, the Incredible Hulk. The series is typical Hulk fare, with Banner trying to cure himself while avoiding the military, but it made the smart choice of not directly adapting comic stories. Instead, it used them as a jumping-off point and packed the show with a huge roster of Hulk supporting characters. Other than X-Men, this was probably my favorite Marvel series from the time, slightly edging out Spider-Man as it had some pretty nice animation and some darker stories than that series did. Plus it had Lou Ferrigno returning to the character as the voice of the Hulk. It ran for 21 episodes across 2 seasons as part of the UPN Kids block. DC's entry for the year was a follow-up to the highly praised and much-loved Batman the Animated Series, and came from the same creative team behind that, with Bruce Timm, Paul Dini, and Alan Burnett. This time, though, they shifted their focus to the company's Big Blue Boy Scout, with Superman the Animated Series. It was a pretty great show, and as good as Batman in a lot of ways, but it took an entirely new approach by using the same art design and style as that series, but applying more of a Silver Age aesthetic rather than Batman's Golden Age look, and by having that style dominated by bright, vivid colors, rather than its sister series' dark shadows and contrast. Also, just like Batman introduced what have become the most iconic voices of both Batman and the Joker in Kevin Conroy and Mark Hamill, this series does the same with Superman and Lex Luthor in the forms of Tim Daly and Clancy Brown. The show's most significant contribution, though, was becoming the second pillar in the DC animated universe, and it ran for 54 episodes across 4 seasons on Kids WB. Well, now I feel all weird, though, because I don't normally cover one of the best shows of the year this early in the video. Oh well, I guess I'll have to power through. Let's shift focus again here and look at all of the series in this category that came from classic animation, starting with another Donald Duck cartoon from Disney called Quack Pack. It's actually the first of 3 Disney cartoons released this year, but we'll get to the other 2 later. The series takes Donald and Daisy and casts them as a cameraman and reporter, respectively. They travel around the world looking for stories to cover, accompanied by the Nephew Trio, who generally cause more trouble than they're worth. The show was syndicated as part of the Disney Afternoon for a single 39-episode season. Honestly, though, the show was probably a bad idea from the start, as it treaded on similar ground, but was a pale imitation of the far superior DuckTales. Speaking of characters from the golden age of cinema, Cartoon Network brought back several of them as well under the banner of the Tex Avery Show, which ran as a collection of 99 shorts predominantly produced by the prolific animator throughout his career. The show also included an educational component, as between the shorts, facts and errata about the cartoons were presented by radio announcer Don Kennedy. The network continued airing shorts under this banner until 2002. Moving forward in time a little bit, we get to the 1960s, and a pair of series that made a return from that era. First was one called Cave Kids, which was a Flintstones spin-off starring Pebbles and Bam Bam in their baby versions and aimed at a preschool audience. It's basically your typical preschool edutainment, babies learning lessons series with the pair, who spoke in Rugrats-like gibberish to adults but communicated in regular English with each other, and Dino having some kind of adventure and learning a moral. It only lasted for 8 episodes and was syndicated on public television stations. The other product of the 60s to re-emerge with a new series this year was Johnny Quest, with the Real Adventures of Johnny Quest. The series was conceived as being in continuity with the original, but taking place a few years later with Johnny and Haji as teenagers. It also supplemented the cast with a new addition in the form of Race's daughter Jessie, who was the techie and scientist of the newly formed trio, with Johnny being the man of action and Haji the thoughtful, contemplative one. It was a pretty well done and really nice looking series, well, except for some era-limited CGI, that aired on Cartoon Network for 52 episodes over 2 seasons. It's somewhat ironic that the series wanted to take a more grounded and realistic approach to its stories than the original version had, but then cast notable sci-fi voices in the form of Star Trek The Next Generation's Q, John Delancey, as Dr. Quest, and the T-1000 himself, Robert Patrick, as Race, as well as the future iconic voice of female Commander Shepard, Jennifer Hale, as Jessie. Lastly in this category, finally, is a new version of a classic cartoon that was adapted from an even more classic anime with Eagle Riders. The series was the third in the US for Japanese superhero team Gatchaman, having been previously seen in the 1978 series Battle of the Planets and 1986 series G-Force Guardians of Space. However, whereas both of those series adapted the original Gatchaman series, with Battle of the Planets being a heavily Americanized version and G-Force being a much more faithful adaptation, Eagle Riders adapted a mix of the sequel, appropriately titled Gatchaman 2, and its sequel, Gatchaman Fighter. As happened quite often during the time, the series was a butchered Franken-mess that removed anything slightly controversial from the original Japanese series, changed all of the names, all of the terminology, all of the music, and even all of the sound effects. And it was generally such a mess that several episodes are credited as being written by R.D. Smithy, a pseudonym used for writers who have their names removed from a project. And yes, when I say different music, I mean they ditched Hoyt Curtin's original iconic soundtrack as well. It also probably doesn't help that Gatchaman 2 and Gatchaman Fighter were both somewhat weaker series than the original. Oh well, at least they gave the characters better names than they stuck them with in G-Force. This series lasted for 65 episodes in syndication, but didn't even include the last 8 episodes of Gatchaman Fighter. It aired in early morning time slots with another anime that came over this year, which, we'll get to later. Next up, after having had a break from them last year, we got a handful of new shows based on real people. Well, I mean, at least to some extent. The first of these starred representations of the iconic Las Vegas magic act, Siegfried and Roy, and placed them in a fantasy kingdom besieged by a quartet of demons. They and their white tire manticore set to work using their magic to fight the demons and save the kingdom. It seems like a pretty flimsy basis for an animated vanity project to me, and I haven't actually seen it, but based on the fact that it only lasted for 4 episodes on Fox Kids, it seems like any potential audience probably felt the same way. Speaking of flimsy plots, we also got a series this year created by comedy-turned-action star Bruce Willis in the form of Bruno the Kid. Remember when he went all in on that Bruno nickname in the mid-90s with an album and everything? Tried to have a singing career, had his own video game, went all sorts of multimedia? Yeah, I think this was part of that. Bruce played the main character, an 11-year-old super spy named Bruno, who pretends to be an adult that looks kind of like a terrible CGI version of the actor in a computer simulation. Bruce even co-wrote and performed the theme song for the show. It was typical kid spy fare mixed with school drama and only lasted for a single 36-episode season in syndication as part of the Bobot Kids block. Though being co-produced by Nickelodeon UK, it aired over there on Nickelodeon. The only real noteworthy things about the show were the voice actors of the other main characters, which included Tony Jay, classical Shakespearean actor and voice of Shere Khan, Mark Hamill, and Jennifer Hale, as well as the laundry list of famous names making appearances as villains, including... And closing out this category, we have a series from the mind of actor-comedian Damon Wayans called Waynehead. The show was a somewhat autobiographical story of a young poor kid growing up in New York City's Chelsea neighborhood. There's not much else to say about this one, as it was mostly just a slice-of-life comedy and only lasted for 13 episodes on the Kids WB. This year also saw another batch of new cartoons based on movies, as had been a consistent trend over the previous years of the decade. The first one to talk about here was based on the classic 1989 movie from Don Bluth Studios, All Dogs Go to Heaven. Well, it was based on it, but Bluth and his team didn't actually have anything to do with the series or any of the sequel films. The show takes place after the second film in the series and follows main characters Charlie and Itchy, who've been assigned to San Francisco as guardian angels, and several other returning characters from the movies. It's basically an adventure of the episode show with some returning and new villains causing trouble in each that the heroes have to handle, with a healthy dose of antics mixed in. It proved fairly popular and ran for 40 episodes over 3 seasons in syndication. Next up, though, we'll move from the city to the jungle for an animated spin-off of Disney's Jungle Book, which is the one I'd originally put in the classic section, as the movie actually came from Rudyard Kipling's original 1894 collection of stories, but since this version was very specifically a continuation or prequel to the House of Mouse's adaptation, I thought better of it. It's called Jungle Cubs and continues the sporadic trend of kidifying characters from popular series. This one does so with the animal stars of the film and follows child versions of Baloo, Bagheera, Louie, Kaa, Shere Khan, and others on various adventures throughout the jungle. It ran for 21 episodes across 2 seasons on ABC, but in my opinion suffers from the same issues as the Quack Pack. Much like DuckTales was similar but far superior to that series, Tailspin takes the same characters but is far superior to this one. But I guess this series was more true to the source than Tailspin and pretty well received, so what do I know? Anyway, let's stay in the jungle for another movie spin-off with Jumanji, which is based on another movie that was based on a book. This time, Chris Van Allsburg's 1981 picture book of the same name, via the Robin Williams movie, also of the same name. The series features Robin's character Alan and the kids from the movie, Judy and Peter, as they get sucked into Jumanji on each turn of the game, rather than the game spitting something out into the real world. Basically, each episode becomes a single turn where the pair have to work with Alan to solve that turn's riddles while also trying to help him solve his to finally escape. This one also ran for 40 episodes across 3 seasons, initially on UPN Kids before being syndicated as part of the Bobot Kids network. Also, I'll mention that this was at least the third series of the year so far that featured Tim Curry, but you only get the clip once this video. I don't want it to wear too thin, assuming it hasn't already. Also, one question for y'all about this series before we move on. Does anyone else hate the character animation here, or is that just me? Finally, though, we get to the last, and my personal favorite, movie adaptation of the year. And just so you know, I'm using the term adaptation very loosely, as the show has pretty much nothing to do with the film, except for the shared title. It's another Disney adaptation with the Mighty Ducks. I didn't get to watch much from this year, but I do remember this show, maybe from reruns or something. But either way, I remember it nonetheless, and it's awesome. The series essentially follows a team of anthropomorphic alien ducks from a hockey-based society on a planet called Puckworld. Their planet gets invaded by evil reptiles, again with the reptiles, I really need to do a Ranimated thoughts on that, called the Saurians, but a band of rebels rise up to resist them. The rebel leader is the bearer of a legendary high-tech goalie mask, and with the help of its power, the rebels drive the Saurians off their planet. They give chase, but both ships get sucked through a dimensional rift to our world, where the rebels become a professional hockey team by day and planet-defending superheroes continuing their fight against the Saurians by night, proverbially. I mean, sometimes they play hockey at night and hero during the day. I meant it as an idiom. Whatever, the series ran for just a single 26-episode season in syndication as part of the Disney Afternoon, where it ended far too soon. Oh, and it had one of the best lineups of voice talent for the year, with names like Ian Ziering, Jim Belushi, Clancy Brown, Dennis Franz, Brad Garrett, Jennifer Hale, Tim Space! Okay then. But that's where I'm ending part 1 for the year. I've still got 19 series left to cover, plus a couple that came up in my research that I may have missed in some past years, and that need to be made up for. So part 2 will have plenty of content still. I've also found, while conducting research throughout this series, that other parts of the world really stepped up their animation game in the 90s, specifically the UK, and to a lesser extent Australia, so I foresee videos on those at some point in the future. Anyway, let me know your thoughts on the year so far in the comments. Make sure to like and subscribe if you haven't already, and look for the next deep dive as soon as I can churn it out without making it a complete mess. Thanks for watching, everyone. Stay tuned and stay tuned, as in cartoons. Later.